Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Design Cinema. This is Fane Zhu speaking, and this is episode 76, the continuation of thumbnails from episode 75. Except I'll be breaking this episode into two parts. Part one is going to be pretty academic, as you will see. It might even put some of you guys to sleep. There's going to be a lot of text going on the screen. And then part two, which will be uploaded shortly, will cover the whole drawing thing, very similar to episode 75. The reason why I want to do this is because I want to cover a topic that I don't think I've discussed in design cinema, which is let me try on the title here, the business behind the design. Because what we do is not simply just drawing a bunch of stuff on a screen. We kind of have to think about what goes on behind the production, the pipeline. What influences design? What does a market do? What does the clients want? And all that stuff, as a designer, we should understand. So I'll take this episode to go through some of those stages. Part of it will be design talking, and the other part will be sort of the business behind the design influences and how that impacts what we actually sketch. This is especially important for those who are maybe younger or students who have not entered the industry, have not experienced what happens behind the scenes, because it's very easy to criticize designs from the outside. Right? By the way, this is going to be real time. Okay, this video is real time. There's no fast forward. But like I was saying, it's very easy to criticize when the game comes out, and sometimes we read reviews and you'll say like, "Oh man, this design's kind of generic. How come they didn't make these decisions?" Well, maybe this episode will shed some light into that area. So I'm gonna do a dragon, which I mentioned, a kind of a dragon design for a high fantasy RPG. Okay, that's gonna be my base. Let's say the clients come to us and that's what they want. Well, before we even start with thumbnailing, let's discuss this entire thinking pipeline. Okay, and it's all about understanding a subject matter, which is this area that I have highlighted here, and later understanding of the clients and what their needs are in terms of budgets and production cost. Okay, so I'm going to break this down into three parts. This part I'm going to call it the before. The before is going to be the cultural history. We are dealing with a mythological creature, a dragon. And this creature happened to be very, very strong in terms of its cultural influence. Most people know what a dragon somehow looks like, right? And there's two types. We have the European origin type of dragons, the Draco, which generally looks like a lizard. It's got bat wings, it's got 4 legs, usually breathe fire or poison or something of that sort, and it likes to guard treasure, okay, and flies. Now, of course, this is not everything in terms of the mythological dragon, but it is a kind of standard type of dragon that the general population or pop culture is familiar with. And here are some reference images for those types of dragons, right? Medieval sculptures. This is all originated from European areas. Now, there's another heavy influence of dragons, and that comes from Asia. And the Asian dragon is a little bit different. It has no wings usually. It's snake-based, so it's very long and skinny. It also flies, but without wings. It kind of just hovers. It also sort of stands for luck and being strong, being powerful, versus the European dragon has those traits, but sometimes it's seen as a bad guy. Versus the Asian dragon, most time it's seen as a good creature. It also has a yin and yang factor to it, which is the dragon on one side and the phoenix on the other. It also comes in other forms besides the reptile. It has sometimes you see him in turtle form, sometimes you see him in fish form. So let's load up some of the references for that. And you can see here some sculptures representing Asian-based dragons. Okay, so this is not all the influence. Obviously, I'm doing a very quick summary of the type of design influences that are out there in terms of cultural history. And as a designer, if you don't understand the subject, you should always spend a little bit of time to look into it. You know, Wikipedia nowadays is very, very helpful for this kind of stuff. So as a designer, you're not going into the design blind, right? You kind of know, okay, where the culture from. Because we are dealing with a RPG game here. That means for popular culture, this game has to set a certain kind of language across, and I'll hit that a little bit later in terms of what that means. Okay, so let's put a little divide line here, and now we go to part 2, what I call now. So this is going to be products that exist today. Doink, let's turn that on. Existing products, but in context. Okay, I just mentioned earlier, in context means we are being asked by a video game client, in this case, to design a dragon. It's not for a TV commercial. It is not for, say, a kid's Saturday morning cartoon. It's not a toy. It is not a like a really strange commercial where you have like tissue boxes that fly around like dragons or something, right? So it's for a video game, and there's certain kind of context. So we're gonna be looking at titles of products within that context, and I listed a few here. Doink, right? Here's some games like Skyrim. Obviously, they have dragons in it. Another obvious one, Dragon Age, Final Fantasy, Dragonson, which is a German RPG title based on the Dark Eye, Divinity, which is also I think German based as well. I think I'm not sure, but Eastern European I think. Diablo, I think there are dragons in Diablo. Fable series, Dark Souls, which I haven't played much, but I think there are dragons in there. And then there's some movies here, such as The Lord of the Rings, Dragonheart, which is quite old. That's the one with Sean Connery in it. Ring of Fire, which has a really cool fire-breathing dragon, and Harry Potter had a pretty nice-looking dragon in there as well. Okay, so these are some of the titles, and these are things that as a designer you should also be familiar with. Take a look at what they have done, see what these products have achieved in terms of what they do for animation, for textures, for the scale. These are things that you sort of know. So one, you could avoid drawing the same thing, and two, you want to bring all that cultural maybe perhaps into your design, which again we'll get to shortly what that means. Okay, now the other part of now is references. Okay, and I like to have references from the real world as opposed to other people's concept art. I tend not to look at other people's drawings because somehow that always works its way into your designs. Now a dragon's already made up. It's not a real creature anyways. So you are looking at other people's creations just to start. However, the real world will give you a little bit of the influence where these guys come from, right? Because even when the Europeans and the Asians came up with these kind of mythological creatures, they were definitely basing them on animals that are around them. So, and here are some references. So you got some kind of water dragons, iguanas. Here's some bat wings, right? These things kind of make up your dragon. Okay, let me put another divide line. So far, so good, right? So this is the whole understanding of the subject part. Now I'm going to get to a part which is really the core of this talk, which is the business behind the design. How do we make these decisions? And I'm going to write future here. Okay, so this is going to be your clients. These are the guys who is hiring you to give them the design solution which are written. And these clients sometimes have a impact on your design direction, and that's what this whole entire section that I've saved here is going to be discussing. Okay, so first let's talk about client types. Okay, again, I'm breaking this down to a very general thing here. There's a lot of niche things in between. There's a lot of companies that don't fall into any of these categories. This is a bigger picture. This is also from my own personal experience from working in the industry. So please, don't go to YouTube and go, there's only 3 types of clients. There's many types, but this is kind of the general type of stuff that's out there. Okay, all right. So we have 3 types in general. You have the triple A's. You have the kind of the regular development teams, and then you have indie. So what breaks these apart really is money. Triple A's have a lot of money. So let me take that down. Boink. Okay, triple A's have high budget development money that generally run in the 50 million to 100 million. That's just in development cost. Okay, they have that much money to develop a game. At the same time, they also generally have the equal amount of this for marketing. So they have high budget dev, high budget marketing, so that they could push the product in front of a lot of people as a result of that. So generally, triple A's fall in that category. Like your Skyrims, your Call of Duties, your Assassin's Creed, these are all considered triple A's because they're high budget. And then you have your kind of the regular development teams. These are still good budgeted companies. Sometimes they're hovering between AAA and not AAA. Their budgets generally run somewhere between 5 million to about 50 million, which now you get into the AAA kind of budget realms here. But 5 million is considered still pretty low, in terms of game development, especially making for something like consoles or PCs. That's pretty low. 5 million for mobile, that'd be considered quite a lot. But for this discussion, we're assuming these are going to be for your consoles and your PCs, not mobile, because that's a completely different market in terms of how this stuff here works. Okay, so medium dev companies are somewhere in this range. They also generally have okay, which we call it marketing cost, depending on who their publishers are. And then you have the indie, which we hear a lot these days. Indie is certainly on the rise in the last few years, and that term gets thrown around quite a bit. But in general, what defines an indie is one, they don't have a big publisher behind them, something like an EA or a Ubisoft be kind of paying their bills. They're independent, that's why they're called indie, and they're operating in kind of very low budget ranges, somewhere between 100K to 5 million, which we consider quite high. Of course, you guys seen Kickstarter raise budgets up in the crazy numbers. Depends on who it is, but most indies run pretty low, something between $1 million, maybe $2 million. They're doing a game with. And marketing is almost non-existent for an indie company. They have to do a lot of viral type marketing, or maybe a publisher could pick them up, but in general, their marketing cost is quite low. So these are the three different kind of clients that approaches a designer. And as a designer, you kind of have to know their background and what this actually means. So let's talk about that. Okay, so here's a division line. Hopefully you guys are not falling asleep. It's only been 10 minutes. I'm trying to keep this fast as I can because I know designers like to see images and not a bunch of text like we're in college or something. But this is the kind of stuff that goes on in our school as well. Being a designer, a very small percent of that is actually drawing. A huge percent of it is understanding and the mental game that you have to know. All right, so let's talk about risk factors. Sorry, this is what we're dealing with as a designer. So let's talk about how this actually affects design. Okay, so pay attention here. This is some pretty interesting stuff that hopefully will shed some light for those who are not understanding how game development works. Okay, so with a AAA game, right? This is a AAA here. Now I'm only going to use two examples. I'm going to use AAA, the high range, and I'm going to use indie, the low range. And I'm going to kind of skip the middle one because it's much easier to make a point here with the high and the lows. Okay, so for AAA, let's say their development cost is $100 million to make a game. At the same time, the publishing company is dumping $100 million onto marketing. That's a $200 million budget out the door for this game. For games like these, to break even, you're easily talking 3 to 5 million units sell through. Now that means this is not just pushed to the warehouse. This is selling directly into the consumer's hands. That means that $50, $60 has actually paid through for them to even just break even. This is before they even make profit. So because this amount is high, I mean to sell 5 million units of games is quite a feat to achieve, and that's why they spend so much money on the marketing, try to get it as many people as they can. And then that leads to this, your demographic, and you hear this word being thrown around, right? These big publishers need to hit a big range of demographics because in order to sell 5 million units, you're going to have to target massive amount of people. That means your age group and your sex has to be wide. Okay, so here you got 15-year-olds, possibly to 55-year-olds, and your audience base is both male and female, and you want to target this entire bandwidth in order to push out 5 million units. But what does that mean as a designer? That means as a design, you have to make this thing cater to some kid who's 15 years old, and then someone who's very mature at 55. They both look at your screenshots and go, man, this game looks pretty freaking good. That brings in a lot of different factors here because in general, the term we use in the industry is that you kind of have to play it safe or quote unquote dumb it down a bit in terms of design because your core audience is now very, very wide. So you cannot take a tremendous risk. Of course, in a perfect world, we'll like to do that, but risk brings this factor into play is that if your design starting to alienate this target audience and this start to shrink, so you're going down to like say 25 now to 35, well, this 5 million units being sold might not get hit. Now, this is very frustrating. I think for some of you guys who are gamers out there hearing this, thinking, oh, this is what's making the industry, have problems. And I totally agree with you. This is a cycle that's very hard to break out of. And I'll explain that in a bit about the deadly cycle. Let's continue with the indie budget. Okay, I know this is design cinema and this is nothing to do with design, this is almost business, but it's important. Okay, being a designer is understanding the entire pipeline, in my opinion. Okay, so here's the indie budget. We're looking at $1 million development cost with maybe 100,000 marketing costs. So 1.1, okay, not that much money to break even. In fact, maybe they sell 50 units, they could break even already, because also for indie companies, sometimes their margins are much higher, sometimes, okay, because you might not go through a lot of channels. For a AAA title, you have to go from developer over to warehouse, to the store, to the consumer, to the individual stores, distribution centers, and everybody along that line takes a cut of your income. So $50 game eventually breaks down to like a few dollars per individual that's part of that pipeline. For a indie company, sometimes they could sell direct to consumer, skipping the middleman, where they go to something like GOG, even Steam to a certain degree. Steam is your middleman; they will take a cut of your money. But basically, you have one layer. So if you're selling it for $50, or maybe $30 for an indie game, you might actually get a good $15, maybe even more, maybe $20 on that sale. So you could push less units and make it back. So what does that mean from a design point of view? Well, that means your core audience group can now shrink. You no longer need to push 5 million. 50,000 units is way, way less than 5 million units. Therefore, you can actually target specific audiences. For example, in this case, I'm targeting the hardcore gamer audience, which is somewhere between age 35 and 45. These are guys with a lot of spending power, and they're willing to take chances on games that are not quote-unquote mainstream. So as a indie developer, you could be like, you know what? I only need to pay 50,000 or sell 50,000 units. Let's make this game have a certain style. Let's make this game have a certain risk factor in terms of gameplay, design, and all that. But because your core audience is much, much smaller, it's much harder to lose money on something like this if your audience or your sell-through numbers is much, much smaller. So, all right, let's continue here and talk about design risks. Okay. And what that exactly means. Okay, let's go back to AAA now. Let me take a drink of water for a second here. All right. Okay, so let's talk about AAA development costs, right? And this is where the gamers are going to be like, oh man, how come that game looks like every other game that comes out? Why is that? Okay, here's how I'm going to explain to you guys why that happens behind the scenes. Because again, we don't want that. You know, as a designer, we want to push designs to as far as we can. But the reality sets in is that this kind of stuff ultimately equals time and money. So here's how it goes. Okay, we're gonna say design a dragon for AAA. We could keep it 90% similar. That means all the stuff that we saw here earlier, the historic references plus the real world references and existing products, we're not gonna stray too far from this formula. We're gonna keep it 4 legs. It's got bat wings. It's got these kind of things, and it's gonna look pretty much like a dragon. And we're gonna maybe change 10% of it, and that 10% is gonna be pretty minor. It could be things like better textures. It could be maybe it has 4 horns versus 2, right? So, but 90% of it is gonna look like a dragon. And there's our dragon right there. So, what does AAA do with this kind of high budget? Okay, they want to lower the risks. When you change design too much, the risk goes up. So, what you could do is you could minimize your risk by keeping design similar and make your design or values very high production. And so this means high production value. So when you look at a dragon from a AAA title, it generally looks really, really good. That's because the pipeline coming down here. Okay, here's the pipeline for production. You have your concept guys, that's us. Then you have 3D modelers, you have texture artists, you have animators, VFX guys, and sound guys. All these guys, in general, when they're working in AAA, are coming from high experience. That means they're high talent, therefore they're high cost. What these guys could do is they can make your assets look really, really good. And because you are sticking to the formula, okay, let me write down here, the proven, okay, because this similar thing is proven, it's fast for these guys. Okay, let me explain that more in detail. That means the concept guy, you ask him, hey, draw me a dragon that looks kind of like a European dragon. It's not gonna take him that long. He's gonna experiment. Maybe in a day or two, he'll pump out a crap load of dragon that look all pretty badass, and that moves down to the 3D modeler. He's gonna be like, oh, I sort of know what a dragon looks like. I'm gonna start modeling. I'm gonna start pulling polys and making the claws look like a claws. Not much problem. Not much R&D. He's gonna model away. It's gonna make it look really good in ZBrush. Then it's gonna pass that thing to the next guy, which is a texture guy. The textures guy is going to be, oh, it's a dragon. I'm going to go to my reptile reference folder and grab my lizard skin, my bat skin, the claws from a crow. I'm going to slap all those on guys in there, put all the UV maps and make it just look freaking good. It's going to look so good. No experimentation, more about crafting. Okay, spending the experience to craft that texture. So it's the best texture he could possibly do. And then the animator gets that and go, oh, it's a dragon. I'm going to animate this with a lot of force. I'm going to put a lot of power. When he flies, he's going to have all the wind blow everywhere, and it just feels like this megaton beast. And he's gonna do that, and he's gonna reference things that come before. He's gonna look at how certain kind of movies animate their dragons, going to reference maybe even games like Skyrim and reference that, and then basically make a even better version of that animation. And then you push it to VFX, which is going to add crazy fires and distortion effects. And then we get to the sound guy. He's going to be like, okay, let's make this dragon really deep roar. We're going to play some lion mixed with some bird sounds, just get that all come together so he starts to roar and shakes the floor. So this pipeline is low risk because every guy on this pipeline sort of know what they have to do. That means as a creative art director, if I approve this dragon and give it to the next guy here, it's pretty safe that this design is going to go down the pipeline, and by the time it's in production or inside the build, it'll look pretty freaking good because I'm sure of it, because the guys on the team are very talented, they're experienced, so they're not going to really screw this thing up. You give them a dragon, it's going to come out, it looks good. Now let's talk about the other side of it, okay, which I wrote here. Let's say we change this to 50-50 now. 50% similar, 50% new. Okay, and I wrote this. Think of the next guy. That's going to come in very important here in terms of how things could go out of control. Let's design a dragon, okay, hypothetically speaking here, that is covered in feathers, okay, and instead of breathing fire, it's going to sing very beautiful tunes, okay, very beautiful songs, and these songs make things happen. You know, if he sings a very happy song, all the grass around him grows. If he sings a very scary song, everything around him dies. Okay, say something like that. That's pretty new, I think, in terms of design. And it has no scales. It's completely like a parrot-like structure, maybe a bird of paradise. The colors are very vibrant. It's maybe yellow and red and blue. It's like a parrot, you know, from Brazil or something like that. And it's covering feathers, and it's huge, and it's very light. It's not heavy like a dragon. Its bones are like a bird, which is hollow. So that's the imagine a producer says, you know what, let's take the chance. Okay, the gamers are sick of the traditional European dragon. Let's go for this guy here. Let's approve this and let's go down the pipeline. Okay, here we go. Here's where I think of the next guy comes in. Bam. Okay. Now the concept guy, right? And I wrote this down, trickle down effect for the next guy. The concept guy might not increase his time in terms of design. I think to design this guy versus design this guy, not that big of a increase in time, in my opinion. I think you'll get it done by the same time. Now, when it goes to 3D modeling, here's where things could start getting to problems. The 3D modeler gets this concept and go, oh, that's cool. You know, I can model that. However, maybe a feather-covered dragon is something he's never done before. So he might need to spend a little bit of time to R&D this. That could range from anywhere from maybe a few hours to possibly a week. Never know. And these R&D tasks could actually fail. He could actually do something and go, you know what, I'm going to try to sculpt it this way. Oh, it don't look good. I'm going to try to sculpt this way. Have some meetings. Let's do it this way. Because it's new. That means a lot of people are going to be looking at this. His supervisor is going to be looking at it. And they might go through a couple rounds of like, you know what, this doesn't look so good. Again, I'm generalizing here. Some guys will freaking take this and just totally kick ass with the modeling, but because the design is fresh, you could, okay, and could is a big word here, right, that I'm using here. You could run into this delay in which in general it takes a week to model this. Now it might take 2. Now that's going to trickle down to the texture guy. Now it'd be like, oh, I can't use my reptile textures no more. I'm going to have to look for feathers. Oh man, maybe I don't even have giant parrot feathers because no one told me that's in this RPG game. So I'm going to go online, go to Google, and start saving a ton of high resolution parrot textures. And then it has to experiment of what does that look like on a dragon? What happens in the armpits areas? What happens on the leg to rib cage area? What happens to that feather? You know, you could reference some birds. You could look at these kind of things. But that's going to require a little bit of slowdown because for a lizard, you sort of already know. There's plenty of references that we have here that solves it for you, like right there. Okay, but if this is a bird, we have to start looking at, okay, this is a bird lizard. We have to crack open some dinosaur books perhaps and see how feathers orientate themselves on a giant creature that walks and then at the same time flies. So the texture guy is going to have to spend some time fine-tuning that, and therefore that could also equal delay. And then we move to the animators. Now you're talking about a animation that's no longer heavy, and you tell the animator, you know what, we want this dragon to fly like very, very lightly. It lands super feather touch, you know, when he lands. Feather touch from The Simpsons. Anyways, all right, so when he lands, it barely touches the ground, and his feathers don't take a big giant helicopter, you know, wind and stuff like that. Now he has to experiment with animation. You go, hey, maybe it doesn't work, maybe it works. And also that might require a new rig. Say you have 4 wings, and this is something especially for those who are not in the industry might not know, but skeleton systems in games are very expensive in terms of CPU and memory usage. So a lot of games share the same animations or same skeletons. Like you look at games like Skyrim, they probably have just 1 skeleton, well, maybe 2, I'm guessing 1 or 2, for their humans. And therefore every biped uses the same skeleton. The enemies, the females, the males, they all use the same skeleton. If you throw in a second rig, like this guy's got 2 wings or 4 pairs of wings, well, now you have to make a new rig. That rig now has to have a new code. It has to have its own memory system. So that could become a major issue if your design goes outside of the existing rigs that the game or the programmers of the tools team have defined. So the animators might run into that problem. That might even kick into problems into the coding side. Okay, so that might get delayed. And then you go to VFX. Maybe it won't be affected as much, but now you have to deal with singing sound. How do you represent a song in 3D? Do you do like distortions? Do you do literally music notes come out of that could look pretty bad? You have to consult the sound guy on how that works, and then you have to work with the environmental guys. Like, man, when this dragon sings, anywhere around him, it has to switch out the models into a dying thing, and that's a lot of work. And all of this could equal delays. And imagine all of this here being pushed. Now you're 1.5 month over budget, and you're over time. That's just for a single asset. That's for a dragon, one dragon out of the entire game, and it's already behind budget. And the worst thing is, you push this into a build, right? Games, they do these development builds. You could push it into the build, and the team could actually decide, you know what, it's not working, dude. You know what I'm saying? It's like, oh man, this feather dragon that sings, cool concept on paper. After 1.5 months of working away on it, it don't work. What do? Do we kill it at this point, or do we save it? Do we go back to this dragon? And you can see how this could cause problems. And this is where the deadly cycle of production comes in, which is right there, which is when your risk goes up, your cost goes up, and when your cost goes up, you're gonna have to make changes to the game to make that money back. And then when you do that, that again goes into risk factors. I mean, this cycle is a very hard one to break out of, especially in AAA game development, because budget just skyrockets. And if you ever, if you guys work in this industry, you will know that. And that's why for someone from the outside saying like, oh man, we want the coolest designs, we want the coolest gameplay, we want this, we want that, we want that. It's like, yeah, so do we, but unless you're writing the checks yourself, if you went to spend $200 million of your own money and perhaps have that $200 million burned up in the atmosphere, then in the real world, things don't work quite as utopian as what one might think. That's the job of a producer, to make sure that this cycle doesn't do this. And therefore, especially on your AAAs, they play the safe route. They're like, let's just do this, make it 90% the same, but let's make it freaking so good looking that a screenshot's gonna be badass. Okay, so now let's go to let me take another sip of water here. And don't worry, I'm getting to the part where how this actually affects us as a designer. Okay, so here's the indie thing. Now, indies have lower cost, and in general, because of that, they cannot do this. Okay, like the high 3D modeling, the awesome 4K textures and animations. What they generally do is they take the risk in design, in the style. That's why I see some indie games with very particular styles. Oftentimes, it's also to save money. But because they are kicking off a lower sell-through number, they could do that. They don't need to sell to this giant range here. So if they take a style, perhaps this band of people might like it. The bands over here might hate it, but this band is enough for them to make their money back and make the next game. So indie games tend to do that. However, because of this higher risk in design, the failure rates in indie games is also quite high. This is just a real world fact. Game companies that start up, a huge amount of them die, or they never get finished, because indie games also run into this problem, the deadly cycle. Because, for example, you can't make up your mind, should we do this, do we do that? And for indie games, there's no budget to recover. See, what these AAAs could do is, I worked on games, the last few games I worked on are all probably 50 million plus. We literally went to design cycles in which we spent a month and a half, 2 months on a design, and it gets killed. It's just, this thing right here. It gets killed. But because the budget is so high and they allocated enough budget for this kind of stuff to happen, they're okay with it. They could recover from a 2 month, literally entire level thrown out of the game. You know what I'm saying? It's done. 3D modeling, lighting, it's done. But at the end, it was decided it wasn't cool enough. It wasn't engaging enough for the gamers. They threw it out. But because of that, they have the budget. And of course, it kind of goes into this little cycle over here. Now their budget goes to like 80 million. Now it's 85. Now it's 95, 100. But they could recover because the bank behind these AAAs is huge. An indie company has $1 million. Now you burn 10,000. Now you burn 100,000. But when they go into this deadly cycle, they could actually fail very, very quickly. Talking about a few months, they're underwater in terms of money. Okay, so how does that affect us now in terms of design? Okay, where does that leave us as a designer? So for me, okay, what I like to do is I like to break this down into 3 design directions, and that's something we'll be doing in part 2. Okay, of thumbnails. We're going to take these into consideration. So number 1 will be the client safe design, we're gonna thumbnail dragons that pretty much looks like a dragon, and we're gonna try to make it look cool as we can, but we're going to change probably just about 10% of it. Okay, I'm going to keep it a medieval. In this case, I think I'm going to go for the medieval direction versus an Asian dragon. So I'm going to keep it very RPG. This is what guys who seen Tolkien, read RPG books and stuff, they're used to this dragon. So we'll do a batch of that, and then we'll do a batch of a little bit higher risk dragons, like the feather dragon that I mentioned earlier. It could look cool, and we could impress the clients. We could show this to clients and be like, man, this is pretty cool. Let's allocate, 2-3 weeks and experiment with this design, maybe. And you could go down this road that we had earlier. Maybe it'll fail after a month and a half. Maybe it'll make it. Who knows? But this is a higher risk. Likelihood of this being chosen down the pipeline, sometimes pretty low. But you're crossing your fingers that the clients will go for that kind of stuff. And then number 3 will be the whole kitchen sink. This is like whatever goes. Okay. The reason why I have to do this as part of my design pass is that you satisfy the client needs generally with these two, especially this one. They're not going to get pissed off when you throw something in there that's a little bit out there, because if you only do this, right? For example, I give them a tissue box dragon or something. You say you're working for Bethesda for Dragon Age, and they're like, give us a bunch of dragons, and then your first round of thumbnails are a bunch of tissue box dragons. It's like tissue box with wings. They'll be like, what the hell are you smoking, man? What the heck are you doing? That is crazy out of context. So obviously, we're not going to do something crazy like that, but imagine even a 8-leg dragon, 4 pairs of legs. Even that, you throw that back to Bethesda for, is it Dragon Age? No, Dragon Age BioWare, sorry. Okay, you throw that back to BioWare. They could be like, dude, what are you doing, dude? We want a badass dragon. What is this, centipede thing that you're giving us? So it's high risk. But if you already threw in the badass dragon and you threw this in as an additional design pitch, well, they can't get really pissed at you. They already got what they want here, but they could look at this, go, this is kind of cool, but okay, maybe not for this game, but it's pretty cool. Or they could be like, it's pretty cool. Maybe we'll use that leg, maybe we'll use that wing. So at least you give you something to fall back on when you have something already safe here. So that's the kitchen sink version. But keep in mind that we always have design in context. This has to do with the tissue box thing I just mentioned earlier, okay? And which is part of the episode, part 2, coming very shortly. Hopefully I can record that tomorrow, okay? So design in context, may break that down. What does that mean? That means pop culture. That means when we do the thumbnails, we have to take in consideration all the stuff we mentioned earlier. The dragon pretty much have to sort of look like a dragon, okay? You cannot go too far from the formula, because then you cannot really call it dragon anymore, okay? Of course, it's going to be debatable in terms like it doesn't even exist in the first place. Why can't we call a rabbit with wings a dragon? You could debate that, but you probably lose, because the pop cultural reference for a dragon, it's so ingrained in your populace that's hard to stray away from that formula, that a rabbit with wings is no longer called a dragon. So I drew this here to make that point. See, this is the dragon that your audience in general expects, the 4-legged winged looking thing with the long tail. I could call flying mushrooms with wings a dragon too. I call it the mushroom dragon. But imagine you're playing a game like Dragon Age, and the final boss, you're facing off the final dragon. The dark clouds part, the thunderstorms rages, the lightning is flashing, and out of the dark funnel clouds comes mushroom dragon. I think the gamer will be like, what in the world just happened? Do you know what I'm saying? Because why? It's out of context. Now, if you're playing a kind of a funky game like Scribblenauts, maybe something even Super Mario, right, which has a little bit wackier design directions, well, that's in context. A mushroom dragon in Super Mario Brothers possibly could work, because now you find the end game, and now the clouds part, the cartoony looking clouds part, the little stars part, and then choo 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 sound, and then this mushroom dragon shows up. As a player, you're in the right context. You look at that, and go, oh, okay, I'll buy this design. You know what I'm saying? It's not out of context to Mario jumping on other little mushrooms. I'll buy it. So that's what I mean by context. In this case, we are dealing with RPG games, so we're gonna keep it within this context. Okay. So that pretty much summarizes this episode. Okay, I hope it helps you guys understand a little bit of the business behind the design industry, why certain decisions are made for quote unquote generic designs, and why is it so much harder for us as a concept designer to try to push designs that are a little bit out there. Because remember, it's not about you, it's about the next guy. Let me get my pen over here. Okay, it's about this. Think of the next guy in the pipeline. As a designer, this kind of stuff has to work down the line. the modelers, the 3D guys, the texture guys, the animators, they all have to bring this to life. It doesn't stop with you. So of course we want to push the fresh designs out there. And in general, when we deal with clients, we do that, and that's why there's 1, 2, 3s here, right? When I submit stuff to clients, they are these kind of things. A lot of concept guys out there submit this version as well, but especially AAAs, this one generally gets picked, and that's what gets shipped in games, and players only see this version, and they're like, oh no, everything's kind of generic, everything looks the same. Well, you kind of have to consider what happens behind the scenes. So I'm hoping the industry could change, but it's hard. We're at a stage right now in the business in which cost is just skyrocketing. I think the golden age of gaming was in the mid-90s, because right around mid-90s, most games, the higher end games, cost about 5 million. 5 million is still a relatively low number to recover from. So most of the game genres like RPGs, RTS games, first-person shooters, third-person adventure games, puzzle platformers, if you think about these games, they're all defined mostly in the mid-90s and early 90s because game companies are taking chances. They're trying things I never tried before. And therefore, you get these games are now iconicized in terms of gameplay. In the last few years, it's a little bit hard to do that because of budget. Everything costs more now. So there's no simple solution for that. One of the ways that companies are solving that, no, it's not even solving. Well, one of the things you're seeing now is countries with lower development costs. For example, Eastern Europe, the living cost there and salary is lower, but the talent is still extremely good. So you're seeing products coming out of some of these countries that look like a AAA, but they're done for 1/10 the cost. But of course, these countries eventually going to suffer the same thing these, say, U.S. companies are going through right now. Same thing. Their budget's going to go up because the salary is going to go up over time, and they'll run into the same issue. So in the anytime soon, this problem not easily solved. As a designer, we could try to do our part by doing this, and therefore, I shall see you in, let's pop that again so I don't mess it up. Boop. Okay, see you in part 2, in which we try to do a bunch of thumbnails that caters to 1, 2, and 3. So I will be recording that tomorrow. And in the meantime, if you guys have questions, please write it down in the comment section. I hope this was an informative episode. I know it's a little bit different. But yeah, I think it was quite fun for me to do this as well. And also, you guys get a little taste of some of the classes we teach here as well. That's not drawing related. Is all this kind of stuff. Okay, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys shortly in part 2. All right, bye bye.